Ora, viva pessoal, bem-vindos a mais um BANGCAST, o podcast da revista Bang. Como sempre, estou cá eu, Luís Corte Real, os dois convidados residentes, o Luís Filipe Silva e o Bruno Martins Soares, e hoje temos um convidado muito especial, o Richard Morgan, um autor da Saidadeemergencia já há uns bons anos. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Thanks to be here. Who is Richard Morgan? Let us know. You've been in Portugal. We did the math. It was like 15 years ago.
Yes, it was a long time ago, wasn't it? Yeah. Well, I haven't changed that much. I put on a bit of weight. Yeah. Who's Richard Morgan? I don't know. I mean, I guess. I am now. I guess I can lay claim to the fact that I'm a full-time science fiction and fantasy author for 20 years now, and as I say, mostly writing very violent science fiction and fantasy. That's my day job. I moonlight occasionally in comic books and more recently quite a lot in video gaming. I've done quite a lot of writing for various video game companies and studios and so forth. And, you know, rule nothing much out of bounds. I've written 9 novels so far, of which the most famous is undoubtedly and rather annoyingly the first one, Altered Carbon, which, you know, some people may have seen on Netflix over the last couple of years. There are 2 sequels to that I wrote and a bunch of other stuff too, none of which has ever been quite as famous as Altered Carbon itself. I'm still working away at that. And what else am I? I don't know. I'm in my 50s. I'm a husband and a father. Got into fatherhood rather late, which is hence the bags under my eyes. And yeah, just enjoying very much having made it as a full-time author, because it was the only thing I really wanted out of life. And it took me 14 years or more of my adult life to post university to actually achieve that goal. And I still, even now after 20 years of it, I still have days when I wake up and sort of go, oh my God, I did that, didn't I? So I really am still living the dream, and very, very grateful for that.
Okay, good. Congratulations about that. It's not easy in Portugal for a writer to be a professional writer.
No, I can imagine.
I think in UK it's easier, but it's still something very, very hard to achieve, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think the figure that I hear a lot, I don't know how accurate it is that about 80% of writers in the English language, novelists in the English language, never get to give up their day job. So they will, although they are published and they may be successful, they get good reviews, their books sell okay, but they will never make enough money for that to become their main job. They'll always have to be writing weekends and evenings, and that's about 80%. Last time I talked to someone who knew about it. So to be an author and to be a full-time author it really is quite a remarkable thing. It's not an easy thing to achieve at all, and then not an easy thing to sustain, because that's the other problem. Of course, I think especially for people who haven't written a book and been published, there is this sort of sense that there's just this goal, which is to make it as a published author. And of course, what they don't tell you is that, that's the first hurdle. And then you've got to do it all over again, and again, and again, and again. And so it's not just, getting there, it's also staying there once you've got there and staying fresh, keep, reinventing yourself as much as you can, trying to write something that you feel is worthwhile. It's not without its challenges.
I do think that 20% of successful authors is very, very good.
Will be less.
Here
Here
in Portugal it's probably close to 1% or something like that.
No, I mean, sure. I think the point with obviously, in English language writing is you've got this much broader potential market, and I mean that for many years, initially I did very well out of movie deals, but when the movie deals went away for a while and I was existing solely on my royalties, there's no question that my standard of living depended far more upon my American royalties than it did upon my UK royalties. You know, the American royalties would generally come in at anything from 2 to 5 times as much as what I did in the UK. So yeah, I mean, any small European country by definition is not going to have as good an outreach. And say the other thing is, isn't it? I didn't realize this until relatively recently, but Brazil is not really a market for Portuguese writers in the way that, say, America.
Not really.
No. It's like a different world for us.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and even the language is you know, there are differences.
We created, Said, we created a publisher in Brazil 8-9 years ago, and it was very difficult. You cannot use the same translation. You have to adapt to the translation. Yeah. They can read the Portuguese from Portugal, and we can read the Portuguese from Brazil, of course, but it has enough differences so that force you to change things. And the market there is huge, and the distribution is very, very complicated. We had to sell the publisher. It was crazy. But it was a very interesting experience. We did a lot of friends, and they know the publisher. They read our books. But it was very hard. It's not like the Spanish publishers and the rest of South America. It's not the same thing.
It's not,
and the shipping costs are absolutely sky high. It's almost impossible to order a book and pay a reasonable amount of money for it.
I noticed, I was looking at your bibliography, all the books you published until now. I noticed that in the beginning, you were writing a book per year. Each year, you had a novelty.
Ish.
More or less.
I mean, I'm trying to think. I think I managed more or less. I think it was more like a book every 18 months. So Carbon came out, and then, Broken Angels came out more or less within a year. But that was because Broken Angels was based on something I had already sort of written in a different form. Woken Furies was a little bit late, and I think that was more like an 18-month gap between those. And then, and Market Forces, of course. Yeah, no, you're right. But again, Market Forces was based upon an existing screenplay that I had also written beforehand. So I think in those early years, the first 4 books or so, I was using material that already existed, which made it a lot easier to get the books turned around.
Okay.
And the first time I had to stop and actually really excavate from scratch, which was with Black Man in 2007, and that one, that took significantly longer. That was like about 2 years, I think.
I was asking if you are slowing down for some reason.
A number of reasons, really. I mean. One of the reasons I slowed down, well, I think there was a hiccup with Black Man, and that was basically because I had a bereavement. My mother died, and that kind of knocked me for 6. But then I got back on track, and Still Remains came out again about a year after Black Man, a little bit more than a year maybe. And everything seemed to be going swimmingly for a while. And then then the video game industry came calling. And they basically sort of said, come and do a bit of writing for us. And a bit of writing turned into a lot of writing. And and I suddenly, it was a bizarre experience because I went from a very quiet, full-time author's existence, which is literally you get up, you have breakfast, you go sit in your room and type all day, and that was really it. And that then suddenly, I got tipped into the world of video games, which still is to some extent, but back then especially, it was very much, I think, a bit like maybe the way that the movie industry was in the 1980s, and that the music industry was maybe in the 60s. So there's this insane amounts of money and willingness to try absolutely anything under the sun. And these guys were literally going, I really like this. I like this author, so let's hire him to work on our game. Does he know anything about games? Well, not really. But anyway, it doesn't matter. And it was amazing. I was for about 4 years, a little bit less than 4 years. I was pretty much a hired gun for Electronic Arts in that I didn't work for them, but I was just sort of things that they were interested in and working on, they would send me to look at. So they hired me to work on this video game Syndicate, a reboot. They hired me to work on to go and work with Crytek in Germany on Crisis 2. They hired me to go and look at some other projects that were sort of up on blocks and, you know, were frozen in development, and they wanted to see if we could get them unfrozen and stuff. I looked at 2 or 3 of those as well. But it literally was just this world, this bizarre world of jumping onto airplanes and going to other cities and living in hotels and going, you know, and just doing game work. It's very exciting. I mean, it came about 10 years too late, because by then I was in my early 40s, and a number of times I found myself thinking, damn, if only this had happened 10 years before, when I was fancy free and single and had lots more energy, you know, it would have been awesome. And it's an incredibly dynamic environment, games. You know, it's the technology is moving fast. There's you know, the people who work in it are always moving around. People tend to stay for a couple of projects and then they'll move on to another studio because they're just bored. They want to go somewhere else where the weather's different, you know. And it's a very young industry as well. It's still a very young industry. Yeah, and I say, plus this whole thing of literally the phone rings and you go, yeah, oh, Richard, can you come out to Frankfurt? Well, when? Well, tomorrow. Would that be all right? And yeah, I guess. And bang, you're on a plane and you're gone, and you're and then I say one time it was like, you know, would you mind terribly going out to Vancouver and looking at a game that they're working on there? And you're like, oh, well, if I must, you know. And
the money was good, Richard.
The money was very good. The money was ridiculously good. Yeah, and but more than the money, I mean, it was just very, very exciting, and a complete change from my day job, because, as I said, you as an author, I mean, you know, authors are not very interesting in their day-to-day life. You know, we sit in front of our computers and we type, and that's about all we do. So going from that to going to this intensely, you know, collegiate social dynamic where you're in and out of meetings all the time, you're sort of firing stuff off to somebody to look at, it comes back with comments, you edit, you fix, you know, it's the polar opposite of what I was used to, really. And so, yeah, that was very exciting. But yeah, it sort of punched a hole in my, I thought that I would be able to balance it with the writing, because I just thought, oh, I'll do a bit of work for them and then I'll get on with the novel and then I'll do a bit of work for them. Just impossible. Because the demand is constant. So I honestly, I didn't actually want to do the traveling. I mean, I had said to them I would prefer to work from home, you know, and they were like, oh, well, no, we'd really like you to come out on site if you could. And I'm going, well, it'll cost you, you know. And I actually put a sort of a per diem fee on my time on site, and that wasn't because I was trying to make money. That was because I literally hoped that they would not ask me to go because of that. I would, well, if I asked for a lot of money, then they'll go, all right, look, it's okay, stay in Glasgow and we'll do this by internet, you know. But they didn't. They just went, yeah, that's fine. And I say, I had this salutary moment when I walked into this hotel in Germany where I was staying when I worked with Crytek in Frankfurt. And it must have been, I guess it was probably about April, something like that. And I walked in, it was late because I used to get in late. Walked in and the guy checks me in and he just gives me this bottle of wine. And I looked at it and I went, oh, that's very kind of you. Thanks. What's that for? He goes, well, that's because, Mr. Morgan, tonight is your 100th night in our hotel this year. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, it's only April.
How about now? Are you working? Are we still working in those things?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, these guys, Gunzilla, they came looking for me last year in the middle of lockdown. And again, initially the idea was that I would do a certain amount of work for them. I would write a couple of things they wanted me to write. And then I just got embedded. And I woke up one morning and they just said, yeah, you can be a development director. And so now I am. And that is, again, taking a lot of my time, which obviously means that there's less time for me to work on the book. And again, I have to try and balance it somehow. It hasn't been the easiest either, obviously, because lockdown, homeschooling, all the paraphernalia of the last couple of years. It's been quite stressful, but no. So I am back plugged into it again. There's not as much traveling, obviously, because no one can really travel at the moment. But again, the level of dynamism is still pretty much the same. It's this crazy sort of, right, we need a character sketch. Can you get us a character sketch? Bang, yeah, there it is. Send it in. But it keeps you fresh, it is nice. It keeps you on your toes. It's a different kind of writing to the writing that I usually do, which is nice because sharpens you, I think, keeps your wits about you. The gaming sort of slowed me down quite badly back in the sort of late 2008, 9, 10. So there was a big gap between the first and the second fantasy novel. And then just when that had all sort of settled down a bit and it looked like I wasn't going to be in as much demand, I had a kid, and wow, if I had thought that I was tired and busy when I was working in games, that is nothing compared to how tired I was once I had a baby. And so yeah, again, that completely flattened me. I mean, I literally just I had the time because I wasn't really doing anything. The gaming had kind of gone away for a bit. That I wasn't really busy with that anymore. But I can remember for a period of months going and literally sitting in front of my laptop and not writing anything because I was just brain dead. I literally, your life becomes this kind of, landscape of nappy changing and bottles and creams and all this stuff, and then Netflix picked up Altered Carbon, so then there was that, and I was busy. I was out to talk to the writers' room. I went to watch them shooting the show. I was doing publicity for it. I got pulled into a whole bunch of cool stuff as a result of that as well. Invited to give talks and things and stuff like that. So that punched holes in my productivity. Then COVID and the new gaming thing and all the rest of it. So it just seems like one thing after another. It's just like obstacles being placed in my path. So yes, I have slowed down a lot.
So coming back to writing for other media, when you're writing a script either for games or consulting for a movie, you're not actually writing the end product. You're just writing a medium for someone else to use and make it their thing. Do you feel that? Do you still recognize yourself? You're writing what you want to do, what you want to say when that happens.
Oh yeah, I mean, one of the really nice things about how fame, for want of a better word, has happened to me is that everything I've done has been on invitation. So like when I wrote Black Widow for Marvel, that was literally a Marvel editor came to me and said, would you like to do this? And I said yes. Similarly, when I was invited to work on the show, it wasn't something I had to do. It was literally, they said, would you like to be involved in writing for the show? Would you like to meet the writers' room? Would you like to get? And I'm like, yes. And similarly with the games, when the guys from Electronic Arts got in touch, it was literally, hey, would you like to come and work on a video game? And I'm like, what? And get paid? Yes. So the great thing about it is that all of those experiences have been on invitation, and mostly I've been given a pretty free hand. So I've not had to. It's not like where maybe you pitch for a job. Say that you pitch to get a job writing for, I don't know, Marvel for Netflix or something like that. Then you're constrained because obviously then what they expect from you is what they want. But every time that I've been hired, it's been they've come to me and said, we would like you to come and do something for us, and it's more or less up to you what you do. So it's in that sense, I don't often find myself writing stuff that isn't me, and that's lovely. And then that is a genuine privilege. So the project I'm working on at the moment, essentially asking me to build a world for this game. And there were obviously some things that were set in stone in terms of conceptual stuff for the game. But apart from that, I was given carte blanche. It was literally, we want you to make up a world. Here are 2 or 3 things that have to be in it. Apart from that, whatever you want, you know. And that is just, you know, more than the freedom that I've got, that because of what I do for a living, that the being given a bunch of toys to play with and not being told what to make is an incredible privilege, you know. It literally.
But writing a book or writing a movie or a TV show or a game, these are completely different types of writing. Right? For instance, for a movie, it's very technical. You need to have everything in place. In a video game, you have to have a lot of boundaries. And how do you manage that? Do you like one medium better than the other? What's your idea about it?
I think my first love is still really novels. I mean, I think, you know, there's so much you can do in a novel that you can't do in other media. Other media, however dynamic and exciting they are media that you're at a forced pace. So whether it be a movie or a TV show or a game, these things are moving at speed, and you can't do much about that speed. So your delivery has to be harnessed to the speed of the thing, right? So that's where your limitation is. Novels don't have that. A novel, you can put whatever the fuck you want in there as long as you have the stylistic chops to make it stick. You know, I mean, one of my favorite novelists, you know, in general terms, Thomas Pynchon, and Pynchon will just write whatever the fuck he feels like, and he'll make you like it. You know, you literally, the last big one, Against the Day. I don't know if any of you guys read that. You know, it's a colossal thing. And there is a digression in it which is completely gratuitous. It serves no useful purpose in the narrative at all. Where it's set in the early years of the 20th century, I guess. So anyway, there's this scene in which there is this guy and his daughter who are sort of trundling around in the West with a little wagon, and they come across some ball lightning. It's this peculiar form of lightning that it's little balls of electricity, and they behave in incredibly weird ways. They don't seem to obey a lot of the laws of physics. They're apparently we still don't really understand how they work. Anyway, so they come across this little piece of ball lightning, which they make friends with, and the little piece of ball lightning attaches itself to the daughter, who's a little girl, right? She's maybe 7 years old or something like that, and becomes her pet. And for a while, the 3 of them travel across the prairie together, you know, the old guy, the little girl, and the ball lightning, right? And it's absolutely beautiful. It's enchanting. It's cleverly told. It's funny. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's completely gratuitous. There's no, you know, narrative value in it, in the sense of it contributing anything to the main thrust of the novel. But he's like, fuck you, I'm going to write this because I feel like it, and I'm going to see how far I can push it. I'm going to see where it goes, and you will like it. You know, and that, you know, novels are the only place you can really do that. You won't get away with that with screen entertainment, because the audience won't sit still for it. So my first love is still novels because of that immense elasticity that you have. But so the other forms have value as well. One of the things I love about game writing, for example, is it's kind of piecework. So literally, you'll go to a meeting and they'll say, yeah, we need a little cinematic scene to introduce this part of the game. So we just need like about a minute and a half of these 2 characters do this, and at the end of it, they've realized something, and then they have to do this, you know, and you go, right, okay, and off you go. Bang! You email it across to the, you know, design department. They look at it. They go, yeah, can you also mention this, because that's something that the players will have to do. Okay, it comes back. You edit it. Bang! Boom! Off it goes. Yeah, that's fine. Signed off. You're done. And there's something very satisfying about that. It's nice to have a small package that you can do, complete, wrap up, give to the people who ask for it, and you're done, you know. And that is obviously, with novels, you don't ever have that, you know. You spend a year, maybe 2 years on a novel before it's a package, and even then it's, you know, it's a package, and then you kind of later on you'll read it again and you'll think, yeah, I know what, I messed that bit up, actually. You'll never be wholly satisfied with your end product there. So there's something satisfying about banging things out in that way. And I think with screenwriting, something similar, I suppose, in that there's something slightly machine-like about, as you say, it's you're creating a template. You're not really creating the art. You are giving them the blueprints for the art, and that's quite fun in its way as well, because you sort of construct something, they take it away, and then they do something with it, and that's quite gratifying, really. I mean, one of the things I loved about the show, about Altered Carbon, was that in many cases they didn't change the dialogue was almost identical in many cases to the dialogue in the book. So I was in Vancouver watching them shoot, and I would see these very highly regarded Hollywood actors delivering lines to camera that I had written, 20 years ago. And that's just, there's something quite magical about that, the way something you've created on paper comes to life on the screen. So that's a reward that you would obviously get with screenplays, with TV writing and stuff like that, which you don't necessarily see with a novel. And then comic books it's something else, is because it's you hand in the script for a comic, and then if you've got a really good artist, which I again have mostly been fortunate to have, the way that they run with that will very often you're like, wow, I'd never thought of that actually, so again you're being surprised by your own work, which is really nice. So I mean, all of these forms have got pros and cons. I think as long as you understand the ways in which they're different, then you're fine.
Okay, let's talk about your first novel, Altered Carbon. It's a wonderful novel.
Thank you.
I was, when I read it many years ago, I was really hoping to see a movie, and I know you sold the rights for a movie, but things just expired, and then I heard it was going to Netflix, and I said, "Oh, that's even better! 10 episodes or something like that." You really prefer a TV series instead of a movie, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't have done at the time. I mean, when Warner Brothers bought the rights or bought the option back at 20 years ago, then I would not have wanted. Then I was very happy for it to be a blockbuster movie, because at that time, TV didn't have anything like the range that it has now.
Yeah.
It was just starting. I mean, The Sopranos came out in 1999. So that idea that TV could be this rather impressive long form thing, it was there. It had appeared on the table, but no one was quite sure what it was. It was like a new dish that had been served up, and everyone's looking at it going, "That's interesting." But when the rights were sold, 2002, 2003, at that time, the idea of anyone making a big budget special effects CGI type TV show was, it was nowhere on the map. The science fiction TV was things like Xena Princess Warrior, So no, I was super happy that it was going to be a movie. Absolutely. But then, of course, by the time the Netflix thing came around, so that would have been end of 2015, early 2016, I think was when I got the call, found out it was going to happen. By then, I was like, hell yes, because I knew that these guys could do it. They had the budgets, they had the wherewithal, they had the sophistication. It wasn't Sci-Fi Channel, and that was mean, wasn't it? That was mean. but and the great thing was, of course, I got lucky even beyond that, in the sense that because Lita Kalogridis is who she is, when she went, and because she'd got the backing of Skydance, because they are who they are, when they went to Netflix, it wasn't just a case of, yeah, okay, we'll make this. It was like they said, we want this massive budget, and Netflix just went, yeah, all right then. And I mean, they maxed the budget out. It was incredible. And I remember Joel Kinnaman saying in an interview just before the show came out, he said, look, this is not TV. He said, this is a 10-hour movie. He said, this is the production values of Blade Runner, but it's 10 hours long, and that absolutely was the case. They not so much in the second season. Second season, they had to dial it back. They didn't get the budget, but that first season was insanely well budgeted.
Joel Kinnaman is very good actor. I think he's going places. Yeah, he's really good.
No, he was great. He was. It's a funny thing because I know a few people when they found out he was going to play the role, they were like, "Oh, really?" Because in the book, the Riker sleeve is an older guy. He's like 41 or something like that, and certainly the way I described him wasn't like Kinnaman. It was say an older man, more sort of tired, more kind of worn down. But the thing is, I had seen Kinnaman in The Killing, the American version of The Killing.
Yeah, brilliant.
And he had this kind of hollow-eyed, sort of dead inside thing going on there, and I'm like, absolutely, this guy absolutely can play this character, and he did. He really delivered to the hilt.
He did.
He was brilliant. So I say I have nothing but admiration for Lita Kalogridis because.
And then you got James Purefoy, which is also...
again. I mean, Kalogridis is brilliant. She's got a fantastic sense for casting. But what's also interesting is she's extremely flexible in the sense that, because I remember we were arguing about who was going to be one of the characters, and she'd had two possibilities. We didn't get either of them in the end. And she said, "Which one do you like?" And I said, "Well, I'd go with this guy." And she went, "Yeah, I can see that." Anyway, we couldn't get that guy. He was busy doing something else. So she said, "Oh, we're going back to the other guy." And I'm like, I didn't like him as much. And she just said, "Well, look, he isn't going to deliver the character the way this guy would have done, but he'll do his own take of it. And that'll be, and it'll be good in its own right, but it'll be a different kind of good." And that was the case that she didn't fixate on people for the roles. It was like she could always see a range of possibilities. And of course, James Purefoy, he was late in the casting. I mean, we'd already been through 2 or 3 others that hadn't worked out. But again, she said to me, "Oh, I was thinking about James Purefoy," and I'm like, "Bang, yeah, that's another one. Absolutely bang on. Great choice." So we were so lucky with the casting, and we got what's her name, Renee Goldberry. Sorry, we got her just before she broke really big with Hamilton. So her star was in ascendancy, and we got her just beforehand, and she was bloody brilliant. I mean, she, absolutely killed that role. And the hits just kept on coming. Chris Connor for Poe. Absolute genius piece of work, the way he portrayed that. And as I say, we just had so many really great artists coming on board. Not to mention, we had like these 3 directors. We had, what's his name, Miguel Sapochnik, famous for his couple of episodes of Game of Thrones that he did, and again, when I heard he was doing it, I'm like, oh my god. And then we got this other guy who was an alumnus of all sorts of American TV shows, and again, incredibly sensitive director, a really great sense of how to get the big emotional payoffs from the characters and things. So we were so spoiled. We had so much quality on board. It was just like, and that's something we never would have had if it had been a movie, because if it had been a 2-hour movie, you would have had a similar budget, and you would have had amazing special effects, and all of that stuff would have come out the same. But I don't think there would have been the same attention to detail with the casting and the sort of the way the scripts were finessed and everything like that. So yeah.
And only 2 hours or 2 hours and a half.
Well, exactly. How do you tell that story in 2 hours? It would have been a bit basic, I think.
You broke into print in the early 2000s. That was a time when fantasy was where the big bucks were. And I think that most of the people who started writing back then were investing in the fantasy. However, you started with science fiction. You wrote 3 books in a fantasy setting, but then you are coming back to science fiction, if I understand correctly. Is this the genre that you prefer? How was your move to fantasy and then coming back?
I really enjoyed it. I mean, it was different. It was time spent somewhere else. It was like going on an exotic holiday. So I really enjoyed the work and enjoyed the difference, if you like. But I kind of, by the time I'd done the 3 books, I sort of felt like my work here is done. It felt like I'd said everything I wanted to say. I had kind of delivered it was very much there was an agenda going on behind those books, in the sense that it was a revisionist fantasy trilogy. It was an attempt to sort of blow up all of the staples of the form, while at the same time honoring them, because I love that sword and sorcery shit, and so it wasn't that I was trying to say there was anything wrong with it. It was just I wanted to take it and sort of shake it, and I'd done that. By the time I got to the end, it was like, yeah, I'm done here. I don't need to do any more of this. I've covered the ground. I think I've said what I want to say. And I was starting to miss, by that time, because of those gaps I was telling you about. It had been the best part of 10 years. And I was really starting to miss science fiction. I was starting to miss the technology and the kind of the speed of sci-fi, the speed at which things can happen, the sort of the overload, the sensory overload that you get, especially with cyberpunk, and those were things I hadn't been able. They were toys I hadn't played with for a long time, so I was very keen to go back.
But Richard, the idea of writing fantasy was yours, or was from your editor?
Oh no, it was mine. Well, it was a mix of things, because again, as I said, one of the nice things about success, and is that when you're successful, people will give you the chance to do a bunch of things that they otherwise might not. And I had sort of mentioned that I had some character vignettes, and that's all they really were. They were just character vignettes. I'd written this very short fantasy mood piece, which is essentially the first chapter of Still Remains. So I'd written that, and I'd written a couple of other character vignettes. And I'd sort of been talking on and off at conventions and to people generally about, wouldn't it be interesting to do a really sort of dark revisionist take on sword and sorcery and fantasy? Yeah, there they are. And of course, the other thing is, you've got to remember that these conversations predated the arrival of Joe Abercrombie, because Joe's first, Blade itself came out in like 2006 or something like that, I think. And I'd been having these conversations more or less since I'd been published. The vignettes predate me getting published, actually. I'd written them, a long time before. So, and I was very interested to see, and then I looked at what Joe was doing, because I thought, oh, maybe Joe's done the thing that I wanted to do. And I looked at what he was doing, and I was like, no, he hasn't. He's doing something else. He's off on his own, his own thing. And that's not the direction I'd be going in. So yeah, I sort of said, we could do that, couldn't we? And my editor went, yeah, why not? Yeah, okay. So he said, let me have a look at the vignettes. How many books is this then? And I hadn't thought about it at all. I literally went, it's a book, isn't it? And I get this kind of Godfather moment where he just looks at me and he goes, how many books, Richard? And I go, 3? It's good. Yes, mine here, please. And I'm not kidding. That was pretty much how it happened. It was lovely. He didn't ask to see a structure. He didn't ask to see, story arcs or anything like that. He's like, no, go on, off you go. I literally was just given the toys and told to go away and play. And so Still Remains came out. It did very well. We got really good press. It was the first time I'd ever been on a bestseller list. Despite doing well out of my books, they had never sold bestseller levels. Still Remains did. And it was like, so yeah, okay, good. And the idea originally was, I was under contract to do 3 SF books and 3 fantasy books. And the original idea was that we would interleave them, that we would do one of each and sort of step back and forth. And because they Still Remains did so well, they came back to me and said, oh, would you mind awfully doing all 3 fantasy ones in a row? And I didn't really mind, but I hadn't actually thought about the second book at all. So that set me back a bit as well, actually, because I'm like, oh, shit, I better come up with a plot, hadn't I? And then the interesting thing about Still Remains is it is pretty self-contained. It kind of ends in a way that if you stopped reading, then it wouldn't much matter. The characters have kind of finished an arc. They've reached a point, and it was actually quite hard to get them. It was like a game of pool where you've put all the balls into the pockets. It was actually quite hard to get the balls out of the pockets again and back on the table. So it took a while. But was there a question in this somewhere? Because I've completely forgotten what.
The question was, you prefer science fiction to fantasy after all these years, right?
I don't know if I prefer it. I would say that I probably find it easier. I am at heart very much a modernist, and I mean, even those fantasy novels are intensely modernistic in the way they're written. You know, we're not kidding anyone here. It's not like Tolkien where there's this sort of oldie worldy flavor, you know, and it certainly couldn't masquerade as historical fiction or anything like that. You know, I did talk to a historical novelist, guy called Rob Lowe, who writes Viking fiction. I borrowed quite a few of his ideas actually. He gave me some very good ideas about, you know, combat and weapons and things like that. But no one's going to mistake The Still Remains for a historical novel. You know, it's not that. So I'm very much a modernist, and I enjoy technology. I like the speed of it. I like the pulse of it, and I think it was more of an effort to make the stories work in a, you know, a fantasy mode where everything is so much slower and more limited. So I guess I'd say on balance that I'm more comfortable probably with science fiction than I am with fantasy. But that said, I made myself very comfortable while I was there. I mean, I settled into it. But, you know, if I sit here and I think, right, someone comes along and just gives me a big bag of money and says, make up a world, you know, write a novel, make up a world and write a story in it, my instincts will always lean towards something science fictional. I don't especially feel the need to go away and make up another fantasy world, for example. I'm not constantly thinking about new systems of magic or new sort of mythologies or things like that. You know, it's not something that I feel drawn back to in the way that I did feel drawn back to the, you know, the sort of the cyberpunk vibe, if you like.
We had this year and last year a few billionaires going into space, having their own spaceships, and
but they all came back, didn't they?
Yeah. But you did think a lot about how the exploration of space is going to happen. You already said someplace else that it's going to be different from the American frontier idea of pioneering. That this will be more market driven, and you've been going to Mars again. How do you feel about all this?
I think the problem is that space exploration has become such a motif that it's inextricable from its own mythology. And yeah, if you think about all the science fiction that we used to read, the models for going into space were usually either the American frontier, you know, settling new worlds and, you know, farming them. You remember Robert Heinlein, Farmer in the Sky? You know, I mean, it was there on the title, you know, Farmer in the Sky, right? Okay, we know what that's about. It was either that model or the other one that cropped up sometimes, especially with space opera, was the sort of, you know, kind of Napoleonic Wars almost, you know, the hornblower type thing of, you know, space pirates, you know. You want something?
Yeah. He's making fun of me because I have a space opera fleet trilogy.
There you go then. Yeah,
yeah, I do.
that was you know, that was one of the other, that was the other sort of lens through which we tended to view these things. And what's become very clear is that it's not going to be either of those. I mean, it's interesting because there's this constant moaning from the sort of more optimistic wing of genre, and also from the sort of the science world. Interestingly enough, all these scientists blaming me because I'm writing, you know, grim, depressing science fiction. It's like, you should be writing cheery stuff like Star Trek, because I became a scientist because of Star Trek, you know. And I'm like, okay, that's your problem. But there's been this weird thing about, you know, and space, and we've lost the dream. And it's like, well, hang on a minute, hang on. We haven't, because we are in space. I mean, we have a full-time International Space Station. We have got, you know, satellites doing God knows, you know, there's so many of them. We just put a new, you know, long-range telescope not into orbit. I mean, into a Lagrange point. Okay, so not even, you know, it's not even orbiting the Earth in the sense that most sort of non-genre people think of it. And we're, there are so many probes on Mars now, they're going to have to start handing out parking tickets. It's it's getting crowded there. So that, we've sent probes to the outer solar system. So we are in space. There's no two ways about this. We are in space. We're not in space as space pirates or as space settlers, obviously not, because it makes no fucking sense, because it's not a medium that lends itself to that. What we've realized is that all the other places in our solar system are extremely inhospitable, and why would you go there? And at the same time, what's happening is that the technology that has come on by leaps and bounds that I think no one really foresaw in the golden age of science fiction is our IT, our information and comms tech. And so we're in space, and we're going to be in space increasingly. But the point is, it isn't going to be us most of the time. It will be our machines, because our machines will be smart enough and hard-wearing enough and well enough designed that they can do almost everything that we need them to do. Mining the asteroids, that's a great idea, but we don't need to go ourselves. And I know it makes for a really great adventure if humans go. You can tell a great story about that, but the truth of the matter is, it makes no sense at all. It's like, we will have machines that are smart enough and adaptable enough. They will be able to go and do that for us, and we can stay right here. And I think that's what's, there's a sort of, when people moan and whine and bitch about, the dream of space. The dream of space they're dreaming about is not anything like a reality. It's a fantasy, and it's like, we aren't going to space like I dreamed about it when I was a kid. And it's like, no, we're not. You're right. And you know what? Cowboys were not real either. It's you're not going to grow up to be John Wayne, and we are not going into space the way you saw in all those movies when you were a kid. But sure, we're going, absolutely. And a few humans will go. But you have to ask yourself the question, what is the bloody point of sending thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people to live on Mars? Why? It's intensely inhospitable. If we were to pour, I think Bruce Sterling captured it for me very effectively, about at least 10 years ago now, maybe 15 years ago, where he just said, look, Mars is about 1 million times more inhospitable than the Gobi Desert, right? And no one's settling in the Gobi Desert, So if it was a question of Lebensraum, if it was a question of we needed space to put humans, well, you could go and terraform the Gobi Desert. That would be a lot easier, and you'd be able to come home at weekends. Why are we doing it on Mars? What's the point of that? There is no good reason for it. Now, you could terraform Mars, I suppose, if we find out, there's no life there, because that's the other thing. If we go and we find actually there is quite a lot of life there, then we've got to, there's an interesting moral question, isn't there? Because you can't, it's like, actually, we've got some quite promising microbial life here that might evolve into something given several, billion years. We'll just wipe that out. We're going to get rid of it because we want to terraform Mars so we can live there. But you've got your own fucking planet. Why are you fucking this one up? It's so intangible, the reasons for going. They're so emotional and insubstantial and ephemeral, and there's no real value in it. Okay, it's a good idea. It would be great to get to do some experiments on Mars, because we don't know what's there, and it'd be very interesting to see what there is. And I'm sure as a resource base, it might be useful. I'm not sure that it would pay, because you've got to bring everything back, but still, it might pay. There might be rare earths, that could be extracted, and it would still be cheaper than trying to find them on Earth, because they're rare. So maybe you could make that work. But again, machines can do that. You'll need a crew. Maybe you send 250 people. And they rotate. So they go out, they do, 18-month tour, and then they come home again. And that's all you'd need. You could do all the experiments you want. You wouldn't need people there in large numbers, And I say, and then the question gets, why would you go? Imagine, you take your kids to a place where they can never go outside, ever. If they're lucky, their great-grandchildren might be able to go outside. It's like, it makes no fucking sense. Whereas actually, we've got a planet which, if we look after it carefully, if we're prepared to invest in it in our own biosphere, and think about how we can improve things here on Earth, if we poured the ingenuity and the money and all the things that are getting poured into this space race, if we poured them into doing that here on Earth instead, that would be so much more productive. If we could render large it's interesting because Bill Gates is not having any of this space shit. He's watching Bezos and
Branson.
Elon Musk,
Branson and Musk, and
Branson.
watching them all blast off into space and come back again. And, he's just like, yeah, all right. No, I think I'm going to try and find a cure for malaria instead, and it's like, yeah, that's so much more useful. That's because if you can eliminate malaria as a threat, you suddenly render huge areas of the tropics that much safer for humans to live and to thrive. And there's your Lebensraum, And yeah, as Sterling says, the Gobi Desert, if you could make the Gobi Desert flower, if you could find some way to get things growing there, to bring it back so it's not a desert anymore. If you could de-desertify the Sahara Desert, if you could bring back plant life in the Sahara and start planting it out, get some kind of wetlands in there somehow, these are the things that are worth doing. And you've got millions of square kilometers of this stuff to be terraformed. If terraforming is your thing, yeah, let's terraform the Sahara, terraform the tundra, terraform. There are all these places on our planet that we could do with making better. Not to mention the places we already live that we've made a mess of and that we could do with cleaning up. So every time I hear someone whine about, we're not in space, fuck's sake, we are in space and we will be in space, and I'm sure that I may even live to see it. I think I have a feeling it's more likely my son's lifetime than my lifetime. But yeah, asteroid mining on the moon. These things are coming, no question. And they might, at the moment, the point is that they're not cost effective. There's no way to make it pay. That's the major problem. But I'm sure that they probably will. These things are going to come. But the point is, there is still nowhere in known space that is a better fit for humans than right here. So
you don't dream with the interplanetary human race.
Interplanetary or interstellar, do you mean?
Where we live in Earth, and we have a plan B. We have a second planet where we can live in case Earth is destroyed by an asteroid or something like that.
Yeah, but it doesn't make any. Again, look, as a novel, great. As a fantasy, as a sort of as an adventure, absolutely. But in real terms, if we had the technology to render Mars or Venus habitable, then we would also have the technology to protect the Earth from anything that's coming at us from outer space. We're already, they're already spitballing plans for deflecting asteroids and things like that. Our space tracking technology is going to come on by leaps and bounds. The level at which we can now scan space, the machines we'll be able to build that can actually check the sky for anything that might look like a threat. All of this kind of technology is coming along really, really fast, right? That's not far future, that's quite near future. Terraforming Mars, as I understand it, is like 1,000-year job minimum, even if it can be done, because apparently there are, I read an interview with Kim Stanley Robinson a couple of years ago, where he was saying that they found out a few things about the chemical composition of the Martian surface, and they've realized it will be much harder to do than he had envisaged at the time. And I think that's going to be the case a lot of the time. We're going to start to see that, there are some enormous obstacles to a human existence on Mars. So again, what's the point? We won't need to go somewhere else because of asteroids, because if we've got the technology to go somewhere else, we'll also have the technology to protect the Earth. You'll be able to put orbital gun platforms up in very high Earth orbit, a cannon on the moon, and basically anything that looks like being a problem, we'll be able to obliterate it or deflect it or do whatever. That technology will be here a long time sooner than the technology to make Mars a pleasant place to live. Because that's the other thing. I'm not saying we couldn't go to Mars, live inside tin cans, or bury ourselves under the ground and survive there. But why would you?
If you are forced, right?
Well,
if you have to, if you have no other choice, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the point. It's like, I lived on Mars for 3 years. What was that like? Well, yeah, it's a bit like living underground, really. In fact, that's what we did. Now I come to think about it. It's like, well, I can live underground here. That's not a... My issue is with the way that we have mixed up storytelling and myth making and science fiction with the hard realities of our situation. And I think that is a problem. It's great to be inspired by science fiction, and to maybe that is the thing that drives you to go and do a degree in astrophysics or whatever. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Sure. But that doesn't mean that when you've got your degree in astrophysics, you then go, right, so we're going to build a starship with photon torpedo capacity. It's like, no, because that shit is made up. And, you know, it's that ability to separate the two out, I think. And I, you know, Thin Air is set on Mars, and it's every bit as much a fantasy as any of the other stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong. It posits a world in which we have managed to terraform a little bit of Mars, not all of it. I mean, it's just the Valles Marineris that's been terraformed properly. The rest of it's still pretty horrible, and that's because that makes a good story. I mean, it's, you know, the fantasy of it is good. But what I wanted to do with the book was to sort of take a lot of the political assumptions about going to Mars, you know, this idea of this idea of it being a new high frontier, and say, well, let's look at what that might actually be like, because, you know, my historical understanding of the American frontier is that it was a pretty shitty place. You know, it's this idea that it was a great time to be alive. I mean, I not really. You know, it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. And I think, again, we romanticize away the truths of those eras and those epochs, and we sort of, yeah, we see it through the lens of a bunch of movies, and it's like it wasn't a bunch of movies. And you don't get to be the hero; you get to be the guy who dies of cholera. Thin Air, in a sense, was an attempt to import that into the standard idea of a settled Mars, and, you know, I was just having fun, really. I mean, it was more than anything I've written in quite a long time. It was a book where I was just about having fun.
And do not forget that every science fiction author seems to have a Mars book inside of him.
Well, the point is, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's been. Stories set on Mars have been kicking around as long as I've been alive, and before, in fact. What's happened is that the more we find out, the more we realize that it really is Mars and nothing else. You know, there isn't anywhere else that's viable. You know, if you go back to the Golden Age, they were still talking about, you know, colonies on Venus, colonies on Mercury, colonies on the moons of Jupiter, and, you know, and we've now realized that none of that is really viable. You know, it's just not none of these are suitable places for humans, and Mars has become the last best hope. It's the only one where you can actually make an arguable case for going there, because you're like, well, you could survive there, you know, in a pressure suit. You know, Venus, you couldn't even do that. You know, Venus, you'd land and you'd melt. So that's off. You know, and the Jovian moons are like just so far away, and there's, you know, it's so cold and there's so little light. You know, forget that shit. You know, so Mars has become it's the sort of, all of the old dreams have condensed down into this one place. You know, Mars. That's the one. It's the one place left. And so everyone's dreaming about it because of that. That's why everybody is you know, is embedded, because it's the last place that you can still do that. You know, I mean, Kim Stanley Robinson, it was, you know, Red Mars, Blue Mars, Green Mars. Very clearly, he wasn't going to write about Red Titan, Green Titan, Blue Titan, because that's just nowhere. It's an impossibility. It's reached the point where, you know, it's a ridiculous idea. When Heinlein wrote Farmer in the Sky, there was no real reason to think about it, I suppose, and they didn't really give it much thought. They're like, oh yeah, it's another planet, you know. But we've now reached the point where we're starting to know our solar system quite well, and we're starting to see how very, very unlikely it is that we'll be sending humans to any of these places.
We are talking about mining and the moon and Mars. You've been watching The Expanse at Amazon?
I watched I'm just thinking, I watched the first season. I haven't actually, I can't remember why I stopped. I think I bailed out to watch something else, and then I never got to go back afterwards. And also the other thing was, they told me that, because there were two main strands to that narrative. There was the detective guy on series, and then there was the space crew. And I must admit, I really liked the detective guy. I wasn't very interested in the space crew story. And then when I found out that the detective thing just kind of fizzles out, and that character doesn't really get much screen time as the seasons go on, it becomes much more about the Rocinante. And I was like, yeah, but I wasn't that interested in those guys. You know, So, but anyway, I saw the first season, and yeah, it was good. It was a very.
Okay.
I think
And-
given that they had quite a limited budget. I mean, you could see that they were limited as to what they could do, and I think they made very good use of it. It was very convincing. A lot of it. I thought that was.
I love that series. And you've been watching For All Mankind with the guy.
No. That's another one on my to-do list. I still haven't. I was going to watch it because Kinnaman was in it, but I've still not got around to it. No.
No, a great paper. He does an amazing character, and it's alternative reality where the Cold War didn't end, and then you have I don't want to give any spoilers, but it's an amazing science fiction, but it could be reality.
Yeah, no, I will have to give it a shot because it's an interesting premise.
It is.
But I saw Ad Astra, interestingly, and which again was very well executed and very noble. But car chase on the moon, it was all very. It felt to me like it was. They didn't really have a story. They just wanted to take you on a tour of all these cool things that mankind was doing in space. Look, here's a space elevator. Look, here we are on the moon. Look, here we are on Mars. Look, we've gone to the outer solar system. It was that same thing. It was like you were sort of thinking about. I mean, again, I thought the Mars thing worked quite well in the sense that, again, there weren't many people there. It was the whole ethos there was. It was more like a military installation. It was that there were people who'd been deployed there. And they were there working, but there wasn't the idea that this was a place where lots of people were going to live. It feels increasingly like it's missing the point because, like I said, I don't doubt that all this stuff is going to go on, but I just don't think it's going to be where the main gig is. And in fact, in Market Forces, for example, there is a base on Mars in Market Forces. You never get to see it, but it's established. You know that it's been established. And what has happened is that they built the base on Mars, and now no one gives a shit about it. And there's this joke about the fact that whenever there's any news from Mars, it's just about some interesting red rocks that they've found. And there's a comedy duo on TV who make jokes about this. There are all these songs, "No More Red Rocks" and things like that. That's the way it's going to be, isn't it? I mean, do you remember when they landed that probe on the comet? And the breaking news story wasn't that they'd landed a probe on a comet. It was that the guy in charge of the project had worn a sexist shirt. Remember that?
I don't remember that.
He had this kind of. It was like a Hawaiian shirt, except instead of flowers and things, it had these sort of gorgeous bikini-clad women sort of sprawled across. And it's like. It was a pretty trashy shirt, I have to say, don't get me wrong. But it's not, guys, I really don't think that this is the major story here, I really, we just landed on a comet. I think that's the major story here. But again, it's very instructive because that's the thing that is like, we've just achieved this incredible technological feat. But the news is not about it because the news, that's not interesting. It's interesting with Apollo 13, the movie. Again, one of the things that I didn't expect about that movie is the way that when they go, they're told, look, you've got to make space look exciting because people are bored with it. You've got to try and do something to jazz it up because people watched the first moon landing because that was amazing, and now they're really fucking bored with space. So do something, and again, that's very human. It's like, absolutely, that is absolutely the way it's going to be. It's also, in thin air, there's the idea that the search for intelligent extraterrestrial life, that they've searched and they found it, and now no one gives a shit because it's like, okay, we found it, and it's 500 light years away, and we have no idea. We'll never get there. They can't come here. We don't even know if they still exist as a civilization because they could have been obliterated 200 years ago and we wouldn't know. And then everyone loses interest, and it's like, yeah, done that. And that is very much. I mean, humans are like that. We are monkeys, basically.
Façam like, subscrevam, partilhem e comentem. Que sejam épicos.
Richard, you have so many very interesting things to say, and as we talked before, in Altered Carbon, for instance, there's so many interesting things like the the fact that the body doesn't matter, the gender, the race, because it's a stack, and you had some backlash about it, but it's a very interesting message. I once watched a Portuguese author, a well-known Portuguese author, saying that message doesn't matter, and what you need is to tell the story, and I find it bullshit. I think we all have messages anyway.
Yeah.
How important is a message to you when you write?
I think it helps to be writing about something. I don't know that I'd be very good at telling stories that were just stories. As you say, that's not even really a thing, because every story has some context, every story. So one of the things that I find quite interesting is the way that American readers very often complain about politics in their story. I don't want politics in my novel. I just want to read a good story. But it's like, yeah, but it won't matter. It won't matter what you're reading. There will be politics in it. You know, if you read the next Jack Reacher novel, there'll be politics in that, whether you like it or not, because there will be a whole set of assumptions about, you know, about guns, about the police, about power and force, and how these things work. So, you know, every story has these things. You can't tell a story that is devoid of meaning in that sense, but you can tell a story that is literally is just a story with a little bit of backdrop. I don't know that I'd be very interested in doing that. For me, it feels like the book needs to be about something. It doesn't have to be about, you know, a major social justice issue, but it needs to be about something. You know, it needs to be about aging, maybe, or it needs to be about loyalty to individuals versus groups.
I remember the reading somewhere that one of your inspirations was the idea of eternal punishment in the Buddhist religion.
That was
the height of injustice. It was what you said, eternal punishment without memory of the bad things that you had done.
Yes, that was actually, that's a good case in point, actually. I mean, you know, Altered Carbon wasn't about that as such, but it was an idea that was very interesting to me at the time. I'd had this drunken argument at a party with this guy who was a Buddhist, and I'd said, you know, I'm sorry, you know, if I'm suffering because in a previous existence I did some horrible things, but I don't remember the horrible things, that isn't justice. I don't know what that is, but you know, it's a shitty system. And so, yeah, to that extent, that informed the narrative. You know, the whole point about the narrative is that this is a man who can't remember what he's done. And to a very real extent, he is not the person who did the things that he can't remember. That cropped up in that. But again, you know, it wasn't just about that. I think one of the things that's changed in science fiction is that things have tended not to be about a single high concept anymore. Back in the golden age, you could have an entire novel and built around this one basic idea, you know, a machine that does X, and the whole story would be about, you know, the machine that does X. And I think one of the things that came with the cyberpunk movement was, first of all, the writing was better. So one of the things that the writing was better was that it had more texture to it. It was a better attempt to make you feel the reality of the future that it was telling. Gibson's stuff is very rarely about one thing. It's a pastiche of things. It's a street scene. It's an image of the future. And I think that's increasingly the case, that when, you know, it's much harder to write science fiction now because you're required to create an entire world, and you're required to come up with a bunch of things that the future will hold. And in a way, that's good, because I think, you know, any decent novel will be about a bunch of things. It won't be about one thing. It will have a whole bunch of a mesh of concerns and themes and dynamics going on in it. And I think that should apply to science fiction just as much as any other genre. But yes, I in general, in answer to your question, I do think it helps to the book needs to be about something, not just a story. It needs to be about something. Interestingly, very often, I won't know what it's about until I'm nearly finished. That does happen sometimes. You'll reach a point where you suddenly go, that's what I'm writing about. I often wish that would occur to me earlier, because it would make the book finished. But very often, yeah, it can take a long time before it becomes apparent what your concerns are, especially if you're like me and you tend to write in a very undisciplined fashion. But yes, I think the idea of the non-political story, or the story that is just a story, I think that's a myth. And I think it's a myth that finds its home mostly on the right of the political spectrum, because for people who are instinctively right-wing, the status quo is not political, So if you're telling a story about the way things are, it's assumed that there are no politics in that. Well, of course there are, but they are the politics of the status quo. When those people tend to complain about politics is when the politics in the story is the politics of change. It's the politics of, for example, revolution, but also the politics of progress, of dynamism, of things not staying the same. And that's when people start to get upset, because they go, oh, that's politics. And you're like, yeah, but it's politics if things don't change as well. That's just it's a different politics is all.
I think we have to wrap this up. Any final question, Luís, Bruno?
I would just like to know if you're a Doctor Who fan, and if you would like ever to write a story for the show.
Not anymore, no. I mean, I loved it as a kid. I watched it. I guess I'm trying to think when I stopped. I would have been in my teens, I think, when I stopped watching it. Tom Baker was my Doctor. I remember some John Pertwee stuff when I was very young, but Tom Baker was my Doctor. He was the one. The point at which I actually started paying attention, and so I followed all through the Tom Baker years. I was really, really deeply into it. The Tom Bakers had some really dark, sort of almost gothic stories in that era, and I really enjoyed those. But when it had this big reboot with Christopher Eccleston, I remember I was at a convention and we all went to see it. They had an auditorium and we all sat and watched it. And I was like, and I like Christopher Eccleston, and I was watching it and I was like, yeah, but it's for kids, isn't it? I'm no longer very interested in fiction that is conceived with children in mind. And that, to be honest with you, an awful lot of the stuff that's on the Sci-Fi Channel, for example, that's the same problem. I have that same problem, that I'm just not, the assumptions are young. The assumptions are childlike. Mm-hmm. And I mean no disrespect in that. But they are childlike in the way that solutions are found, the way that the narrative resolves itself has a childlike simplicity to it. Basically, what happened to me was that sometime in the very beginning of the 80s, I'd been to see Empire Strikes Back, and I was passionately waiting for the third movie, and I'd seen it, and I thought it was great. By the time that Return of the Jedi arrived, and let's face it, it wasn't great, I had been exposed to Alien, Mad Max, and Escape from New York. And it's like, that's it, game over. There's no going back. I had my childhood had just been battered out of me by those three movies. And so when Return came out, I went to see it religiously, and okay, I say it fell apart halfway through. It was a rubbish last half of the movie. First half was all right, but the problem was I sat to watch it and I'm like, yeah, this isn't working for me anymore. Where are the really, really unpleasant characters? Especially if you take, say, Mad Max, for example, the first movie I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. It's a movie in which the bad guys are all painstakingly humanly drawn. It doesn't make them any less evil, but they are very, very human, all of them. And the hero of the story, Max, he's like a force of nature. He's Nemesis. There's in the opening sequence of the movie, I distinctly remember, was really struck by it. You don't even see him as a whole man. You see his hands as he pulls the gloves on. You see his chin, the wing mirror. You can see his sunglasses, and you can't even see his eyes behind. He is the machine. He is the car. So it's a weird reversal, because although yes, he suffers this terrible, tragic family loss, the way the story is told, it's really about a bunch of fucked up, bad guys who are very human and very affecting as characters. You understand them instinctively as human beings, not as monsters. And then this machine of vengeance and destruction that comes for them. It totally upturned my conception of how, good guy, bad guy narratives could work. When you're then faced with Luke Skywalker, and at the beginning of Jedi, you remember the door to Jabba the Hutt's it opened, and there's this darkened figure standing there in the doorway, which is Luke. And for just a moment, I thought, oh, wow, they're going to go there. My God, you don't want to be up against a real Jedi, because those guys are fucking scary, man. But then they didn't. They just pissed it all away. They lost any trace of gravitas, or the sense that this might be someone to be feared. you know, a hero that you are scared of. And that was what was missing. And I say, having seen Escape from New York, having seen Mad Max, having seen Alien, it was a total reset. You know, everything about how I thought about fiction had been changed, had been, you know, all the verniers have been moved, all the dials were different, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And I found that was also the problem with Doctor Who to some extent, was that it's like, yeah, it's great, but it's for kids. It doesn't demand of you an adult level of engagement, and so I can appreciate it as an artifact. I can appreciate it, the craft for what it is, but it doesn't speak to me anymore. It doesn't have the impact that the show did when I was a kid, because that's over, you know, in a very palpable fashion. That's completely over now.
You know what would be great? It was to have you here in Lisbon this year. Yeah. We have to find a date and bring you and Joe Abercrombie too.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, talk to Joe. Come back to me. We'll let's do something, because I feel really bad. I really feel bad about Comic-Con, and I would really like to try and make it up to you guys in some way.
We'll try, and we'll do it, I'm pretty sure. Richard, thank you so much for the time, for the conversation, for your sympathy, and congratulations for your books, for the TV series. I hope you have a new book coming out very soon.
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Okay, that's great. So Richard, thank you so much.
It's been a real pleasure, guys. Really nice.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.